This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. If you own a family business, how do you balance the prosperity and success of the business with the harmony and the unity of your family? How, as a first-generation founder, do you develop your family members into roles of leadership? How do you identify the talents that they possess and utilize those talents? How do you deal with issues of underperformance with your family members? And is it best to send away family members to get experience in another business and then bring them back? Or should it be a more organic thing where they just start off on the shop floor or out in the field and kind of earn their bones? All these questions and more we cover in this episode of Construction Genius with my guest, Nikkei Anani. Nikkei has personal experience working in a family business, and that family business is actually a construction company. So she knows what she's talking about. And she brings to the show here today on Construction Genius insights that you will find tremendously helpful if you have a construction business. And I'd like you to make sure that you stick around all the way through to the end of the interview, because at the end, she gives 3 specific insights for the dads and the moms, and 3 specific insights for the sons and the daughters to consider when they're involved in a family business. So if you have a family business, I know you'll find this particular episode of Construction Genius tremendously helpful. Feel free to share it with other people. Give us a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts, and give me some feedback. Did you find this interview useful? If so, let me know. And as always, I deeply appreciate you listening to the show. Nikkei, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you, Eric. It's awesome to be here.
You are an expert in the realm of family businesses. And so I'm delighted to have you on the show today, because I know many of my listeners have family members in their businesses. They want to pass their businesses on potentially to the next generation of their family. What common challenges do you find in your work that family businesses face?
Great question. Quite often, folks in construction are family business owners, right? I'm from a family business myself, and we have a construction business, so I have a lot of inside experience in this space. But thinking generally and broadly, family businesses tend to struggle with generational transition, handing over from founder to the next generation in a way that will allow for the business to continue to prosper, whilst also keeping the family unity and harmony intact. It's a very delicate transition. Often the analogy that's often given is like passing on the baton. We've heard that a billion times.
Right.
And as we're passing on the baton, there's so much, unfortunately, that can go wrong. From the founding generation trying to, for instance, wanting to retire from the business, but finding it difficult to emotionally let go and pass on the responsibility to the next generation. Also seeking, for a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners don't have retirement savings or an investment plan in place, and actually then grapple with, how will I actually retire? Because my retirement plan was dividends from the business, or continue to get salaries from the business. And so it can get very tricky in that regard.
Yep.
And on the side of the next generation is suddenly thinking about responsibility for this huge business that mom and dad built together. And how do I make my stamp on it?
Yes.
How do I have my voice be heard? How do I champion change and move things in a slightly different direction from how it's been done traditionally? Maybe, right, for instance, infusing more tech, or thinking through sustainability, or thinking through diversity and inclusion. How do I move things and affect change, so that we are able to be future proofed. Those are typically the common challenges that I find my audience struggle with.
Excellent. So we've got a ton to dive into. So let's just start with some definitions. This balance between the prosperity of the business and the harmony of the family. Just tell me what you mean by family harmony.
I see family harmony as not necessarily uniformity, but unity. I see family harmony as the absence of squabble, of deep rifts and conflict. And we all have some level of dysfunction in our families. Like I always say, right? There's no perfect family. We all have some dysfunction, right? But I mean, where there's deep trauma or deep conflict, repeatable issues, that is not harmony. And that usually speaks to a need to have an expert conflict resolution person come into the room, or a therapist to address some family issues. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just explore it though. But why is it that you think family businesses struggle with being harmonious?
I think there's just so many moving parts and so many different people with different preferences, priorities, and perspectives. And in a non-family firm, you're not as emotionally invested in the people you're working with or even in the entity itself. And you don't come with as many expectations, right? I started off my career in London in Deloitte in Corporate Tax International. And it was very much, I was very oriented towards the functional and the technical and the just me being a worker. Whereas when I moved to my family enterprise, I came with very different expectations of, you've got a blend of roles. I had dad, boss, partner, like, and that duplicity of roles can give rise to challenge, right? Because you're navigating family relationship at the same time you're navigating business relationship. And that's just Nikia to dad, right? Now think through generational transition where it moves from mom and dad running the ship to the kids and their spouses and their kids, right? And now you've got more combinations and permutations of priorities, preferences, perspectives, potential for rifts, potential for misunderstandings, potential for lack of unity. Yep. And that gives rise to, it can give rise to a lot of conflict.
I'm interested. You started off at Deloitte, and so, Deloitte's the kind of place where if you want, you can just spend your whole career there, make a boatload of money, have a, some degree of a fulfilling career. What led you to get back or to go into the family business?
Very good question. So my personal journey is a bit complex. So I grew up in Lagos in Nigeria, and that's where we're from, and that's where my family enterprise is. Halfway through my childhood, myself, my brothers, and my mum moved to the UK. Dad stayed back in Lagos building out the business. So he was like this lone founder with no distractions, just beasting it for. So myself and my mum, we were the first to move back to Lagos 16 years later. So at Deloitte, I started off my career there. I was there for 3 years. So I trained up as a chartered accountant, ticked all the right boxes of what was expected of me, of someone of my status, from a family of mine, the kind of career I should be in. But I've honestly just found it extremely dull and hollow. And I had very little touch point with the family business at that point. I mean, I was too young to remember like the business. I was never taken to work. It was just, I just remember things like dad would bring work home and he would make comments like, oh, business is doing really well, I need to travel, or I'm really broke and I need to get more clients. So I really had very little exposure at that point when I was 20. I was 24 when I was like, where am I going with my life and what do I want? And I remember having a conversation with dad, and he was like, maybe you're just bored. Maybe you need to get out into the real business world and come home for a little bit, come see what I've been doing a bit in the family business. And he'd also been doing a lot of investing locally in Nigeria, like VC and angel stuff. And I was like, okay, I can do that for 3 months. I'll come home for 3 months. And at the same time, I'll put in an application to business school. And I was like, I'm only going to apply to one school, and that's London Business School, because I loved London. I didn't really want to move my life drastically and move to the States or go to another city or an environment which I wasn't familiar with, which is really super funny because 3 months into my career break back home in Nigeria, shadowing my father, I decided to make my move a permanent move. I moved permanently from the UK to Nigeria and started working with my dad in our construction company. And why I chose that was because I loved being closer to the action. I was bored in the city of London. I felt far removed from the decision making, from the entrepreneurship. And what was really exciting for me was really seeing the impact that entrepreneurship made on a micro level to suppliers, to communities, to the local economy. That for me just brought me, it made me come alive in a way that sitting in an office in the city of London really just wasn't for me. And that began my journey back home, working in the family business. I then set up the family office as well, and I ran that for 10 years. And it was just last summer that I moved to the US and stopped working in the family business. So I have deep insight from an insider family business owner perspective, as well as from a professional's perspective.
So let me ask you, as you were observing your dad, as you were working at Deloitte, as you were growing up and observing your dad, what was it about him specifically that made you want to go and work with him?
You know what? I didn't know I was going to work with him. So I wouldn't say I chose it, right? Like I said, it was just like I came to a crossroads and I didn't know where to go.
Right.
And it was come home for 3 months and maybe you're bored in your industry and I can introduce you to a few friends and you can learn more about the investments we've been doing, or you can help us out a little bit in the family business. So it was very organic. And then I got home, I was like, actually, this is cool. I could do this. This is fun.
Your dad wasn't saying, come home, I want you in the business.
No.
Grand plans, all this kind of stuff.
No, we never ever had that conversation with any of us. So I'm the oldest of three. There was never, okay, one of you guys will take over this business. Never. There were like comments here and there, like, we're building this business for you, for your future. But there was never any explicit, concrete conversation about, okay, we want you to be in this role, to take over, to work in it. It was always, what's your career objectives? What are your plans? Which company do you want to work in London, in New York, Singapore? How can I use my network to help you in achieving your goals?
Okay. Interesting. So your parents were generally supportive of you, but they weren't insisting in terms of coming into the family business.
Yeah. So, and I think there's benefits to that in that, like, I never felt trapped by my parents' journey and felt like I had to retrofit my plans into theirs. But in a way, I also didn't factor in the responsibility of future ownership of a business into my life. Right. It was just so organic the way I chose to then come back, and I fell in love with the space and took the lead in, structuring the family business and the entities and led the family office and managed the investments. However, I think the lesson from our journey is, I think it's important that families have explicit conversations on the expectations of the next generation and the responsibility that does come with future ownership. It's not like owning shares in Apple.
Right.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Let me ask you this. I know that right now listening to the show are construction company owners who've put 25, 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears into building a business. And they have family members, sons, daughters that are either in the business or could come into the business. And they might be filled with a thought that this person is really a great fit for this business. How does a parent bring their children into the business without driving them away? Do you know what I mean? How does a parent who sees so clearly that this person could be a good fit here, how do they negotiate that with their children?
Amazing question. Negotiate is a great word because it's important to understand, just as much as you have desires and expectations of your children, they have the same for themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have been exposing the kids from an early age and having conversations from an early age as to what their roles should be, how they see the business fitting into their lives, etc. But where that hasn't happened, right? And you're now thinking, okay, I'd love for Johnny to come in as CEO or successor. And how do you broach that conversation? It's really understanding what Johnny wants for himself,
Right.
and understanding that the role your children can play in your business goes beyond the role you've played in your business today.
Right.
And it is very possible, it's to offer them like a platter of, a menu of options. It's not just CEO that's important in the next generation. It's also being an advisor is important, or being an intrapreneur where they seek new opportunities, new ventures, new markets, new services, and investments to grow the family enterprise and really future proof.
Right.
Or to set up a family office, or to set up a family foundation. So it's not binary, Johnny's in the business or not. It's very possible Johnny can work in New York in financial services, or work in a tech company, set up his tech company, as well as advise the family business. But the important thing to understand is that at the minimum, your children will be future owners of the business.
Right.
They may then be leaders of the business. So we need to think about ownership at the very minimum and prepare them for ownership.
Right.
Those that are willing and interested, I really believe in free choice, not imposition, because it will create a lot of bad blood, and then can create fractions with the siblings, right?
Right. Right.
Right? It creates a different dynamic with the kids, who probably saw each other as all the same, but now Johnny's the preferred one that's going to take over the business. What does that mean in practice? So at the very minimum, we're preparing kids for ownership.
Yep.
Where there's a good fit, there's willingness, and there's ability. Then we want to think about leadership.
This is a critical thought here. I know family businesses that in the second generation have been torn apart by the conflict between the siblings. What can a parent do to manage that conflict that may occur? How have you seen family businesses best deal with that?
Perfect question. I think important that families in general have the 3 C's: clarity of mission, vision, and conviction.
Right.
Communication and collaboration.
Okay.
Often what happens, and they need this as a family unit, and they also need it as siblings.
Right.
Because when we think about it, the siblings will, like you're alluding to, be the next generation of owners at the very least, and or co-leaders.
Yes.
Enterprise.
Yes.
Becoming an owner and a leader takes intentionality, it takes time, it takes practice to not just individually but collectively as a team, because you're meshing as a team, right? Understanding each other's respective strengths, weaknesses, roles. You've had immense practice as siblings. You bickle, right. You squabble, you go out for drinks, you help each other,
right?
But you haven't had any experience as business partners, and that takes time. Ideally, we want to start that siblings team formation during the lifetime of the founder. Give good headroom.
Yeah.
A good 8 years to 10 years for them to go through that teething process, understand for themselves that clarity of vision, mission, conviction, gain understanding that unity is not uniformity. We're different, we have different perspectives, we see things differently, but what is that unifying thread that ties Johnny, Tracy, and Linda together? Right. And what is that compelling reason for them to stay in business together, to stay investing together? They need to get to that place whilst the founder's in the room, because the founder acts like a moderator, right? Whilst he or she's alive, they're able to say, well, no, this wouldn't work because these are our values, or this is the direction. And that helps. In absence of that, what usually happens is, for the very first time mom and dad pass away, for the very first time the siblings get together, and then they're suddenly trying to steer the ship without having leadership capabilities, understanding ownership capabilities, understanding themselves. as co-leaders and co-owners, having not meshed and gained under full clarity of that vision, mission, and conviction. And that leads to so many cracks and issues like you allude to, and then unfortunately conflict.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is so vital. I'm going to use a sports analogy here. You have, let's say, a dad who's coaching a team, and he has a couple of sons who are on the team. I'm speaking from experience here, by the way. And it's natural for dads to want to promote their sons. And yet, if they're being objective, they can see that perhaps one son has more ability than the other, or there are other people in the business who have more ability than the family members. In your experience, how does a first generation founder negotiate that dynamic of wanting to bring his siblings into the business, perhaps even promote them into leadership, and yet understand that perhaps they're either not ready or not capable?
Fantastic question, and speaks to this conflict between dad's objective as a dad,
right,
as a family member, and his
right,
objective as a founder of a business, as a
right,
business leader. Because in family, it's, unconditional love, equal treatment,
right,
trying to ensure that your role as protector, as dad, comes into play. In business, it's performance, it's productivity, it's profitability. It's not equal treatment of all workers. It's who's the best and how can we reward them and support them on their upward mobility within the firm, right? It can be difficult to maintain objectivity and to distinguish between these conflicting objectives as a father, right? As a father boss.
right.
And it's really important if it's, firstly, one has to be aware that this dynamic is at play.
Yeah.
Secondly, once one is aware, it might be helpful to bring a third party into the room.
Yeah.
To do evaluations, to look at the next generation. Like I said, they need preparation at the very least for their ownership.
Yes, yes.
And then for their leadership. And then we can come up with customized development plans for each of them.
Yep.
But like you've kind of alluded to, not neglect the ecosystem of core players in the firm that may be talented and have a capacity to lead the organization as well. I think family businesses, we need to embrace more inclusivity in the broad sense of the word, including non-family staff.
Right.
They are the best for the job. So let them be the CEO, because guess what? In the moving the business into the next generation, like I kind of alluded to, we need to think bigger than just the existing construction business. We also need to think about how do we grow our wealth so it grows faster than the rate of the family. Right. So we need to get more strategic and think about new opportunities, whether it's new markets, geographic, or new backward integration, vertical integration, or new joint ventureships, and get more strategic. So guess what? It might not be a bad idea to have a non-family staff lead the construction business, so to speak, whilst the family take a more stewardship role, ownership role, a strategic role in growing the family wealth generally.
Okay, so that's interesting. I'd like then to ask you about how you've seen family businesses handle the mindset of the first generation that says, I know what works, it's worked for me. And the tendency of the next generation perhaps to want to branch out into new areas and to be a little more innovative in either the projects they're taking on or the geographies that they're going into. How does that dynamic get worked out?
No, it's a fantastic question. I think it's a balance between the two. So holding on to what's tried and tested and what we know, but also being experimental to give rise for new opportunities, particularly when we think about this disruptive era we're in. Right. In the fourth industrial revolutionary world. I mean, construction has not been as impacted as in other sectors. However, still may be, right? And there's still an opportunity to enhance the family's wealth, not just manage wealth, but multiply it, right? But what I do see in cases that have been best handled is a true collaboration between the two generations, because there's a need for the elder generation to learn the new and the novel and to understand from the digitally native generation, who have a pulse on the tech and disruption, where industries are heading towards. But there's also a need on the side of the next generation not to always embrace the new and the novel and the risky, but also learn from the tenacity, the resiliency of the whole generation of
Right.
sticking stuff through,
Right.
entrepreneurial lessons that the founders been through. Quite often failure is part of their journey, and that failure shaped the success of the business, right?
Okay.
But often the next generation don't understand that trajectory, that journey, and just see the success.
Yep.
And just imagine that embarking on a new tech business would make them millions overnight.
Right. Right. So what is your view on the way I see it is there's the path that you took where you weren't intending to get into the business, but you got into it. The other path that I've seen family businesses do is, Susie, go away for a year or two or even five, and either within the industry or outside of the industry, specifically construction, go work for another company. And then you've got the other path where, the child is in the business from day one, and they just work their way from the shop floor to the executive office. Obviously, different paths, different strokes, different people. What do you think is the best approach as you've observed family businesses and obviously been involved in them?
From my observation, the next gens that have had external work experience, whether in the same industry or not, is the most beneficial to the interest of the family and the business, because next generation family members typically live in the shadow of the founder.
Yeah.
Who's been successful, and they may not verbalize this to mum or dad, but they are kind of intimidated and question whether they are competent and they have it in them to to create as much success as their parents. And that can really hinder their confidence, and thus their willingness to lead, and their ability rather, to lead effectively. And so it's important that they get away from that world that's controlled by mum and dad and see what they're capable of outside of that world. Get a new perspective as well from how another company is handling things, so they can bring that new perspective and that confidence to be able to make an impact in the family enterprise. Those are the cases that I've seen that have been most successful.
Okay. How have you seen a family business handle the incompetency of one of the kids when it gets to the point where the kid has to be exited, not from the ownership necessarily, but from the leadership or even being employed by the business?
I've seen, unfortunately, bad examples and good examples. So I've seen.
Give me the bad examples.
I've seen a situation where, unfortunately, one of the kids had an addiction problem, and then doing fraud in the business. And mum and dad had kind of kept a hush hush for a while and didn't really want to address the situation because of the implications of their relationship with him, and I guess implication of addressing the addiction.
Yeah.
The reality of having to deal with that. And then eventually they had to, and then had to put him in, get him a therapist and what have you. But in the end, it led to fractured relationships with the son and with the siblings.
Yep. As the family was dealing with that, what was the impact on the other non-family employees?
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets tricky. Because I engage with the family, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that there'd be a lot of whispers, right?
Yeah.
They'd see a lot of signs, but there wasn't, to the best of my knowledge, explicit communication from the family as to what was going on and the reasons why they took the decisions that the steps that they took. And so quite often what happens in family firms is non-family staff just feel like these spectators are just a fly on the wall watching all the drama happen.
Yeah.
Right. And I perceive that that's probably how they felt.
You know what I think is interesting. It's and this is just speaking as a parent, is that many times as a parent you're blind to what your kids are doing because you get used to certain behaviors, but other people can see it really clearly. And I would imagine that in a family business situation that happens quite frequently, where a child perhaps in the business is not behaving in a way or performing in a way that is up to par. The parents, for whatever reason, are blind to it, but everybody else knows the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever see that?
100%. And I think where I was heading to is that's why it's important to have a third party in the mix, someone that's objective and can be honest and truthful, and also find solutions to address some of these issues.
Yeah, that's so difficult.
It is difficult.
So as you're balancing the idea of prosperity and harmony, I'm just picturing one company that I worked with many years ago, and they knew that their son was not a top performer, but that son was going to keep getting a salary despite the fact that he wasn't a top performer and that he was actually hindering the business. And it wasn't like they didn't understand that, but they just didn't care. They just wanted to continue to support that person. What do you do in your role as an outside advisor when you're faced with that with a client? How do you help them in that situation? What do you think your duty is to them?
To explain to them the distinction between their roles as a parent and their role as a business leader.
Right.
And the implications of their decision in that instance on the wider family enterprise system, both in the business and in the family, and to show them an alternative. And that is to separate, there's often flows of money in a family business setting from boss dad to kids, right?
Yeah.
Flows with respect to, I'm giving you this as my role as dad. I'm giving you a gift or an allowance to support your lifestyle. But there's also, I, as CEO of X company, I'm remunerating you for the value of the services you've rendered as an employee or as a contractor. And or the company is declaring and giving you a dividend based on your ownership of the business. And it's important to distinguish the different flows of funds.
Interesting.
Because it not only impacts the dynamic between boss dad and employee son, but also impacts on, like we keep going back to, the non-family staff who are like, but how come he continues to get promoted every year when, quite frankly, he's crap?
Right.
And I put in all the work.
Right.
And I'm not getting anything. So it leads to morale issues, productivity. You may lose key talent.
Yes.
And in a family business, talent is everything.
Right. So that's interesting. I've never heard that before, about distinguishing between the money that you get for your work performance and money that I may give you just because I'm your dad.
Yeah. Because quite often as a parent, I've seen this where it's, okay, well, I'd like to give each of the kids $10,000 a month. Okay, but two of them don't work in the business, but one of them works in the business. So it could be a different scenario like to yours, where the one that's working in the business is the stellar performer and then feels resentful. Why in the world are my siblings getting the same amount I'm getting when I put in all the work?
Interesting. So that is definitely something for a business owner to think about when they're working with their kids in terms of that aspect of it.
For sure. Delineating and distinguishing between the flows and the purposes, and who pays them as well, I think is important.
Have you ever seen a situation where a family member, because of their behavior, has been sort of removed from the business, not only from working in it, but then also benefiting from it financially? Let's say I'm a dad and my kid is an absolute knucklehead, and I'm talking about absolute knucklehead. And not only is he not going to work in my business, but he's not going to get any money from me either.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen that. Yeah.
How's that been handled? What have you learned as you've observed that, or as you've counseled people through those situations?
Usually that's as a result of conflict, right? And it's like, and dad and son then are not in each other's lives as a result.
Right, right.
But I do think that there's a way to negotiate a new season
Hmm.
for one's child in a way that would be amicable, positive for the business and positive for the family. And it may require coaching son to understand what he wants his next step to be, or suggesting other alternatives and preparing him for that next step. So it's as a family business, it's weird. You're constantly blending two roles, as a leader and
Yeah.
as a parent, right? And because you don't want to lose out on the family relationship because you took a decision that was for the business. I think there's a way to make that decision in a way where you balance the interests of both sides.
Yeah, so that's interesting too, because I know, working with my clients over the years, it's like, let's say you've had a bad week, right? And, the project's going south and maybe, Johnny's running the project and, you have all conflict all week. And then the weekend comes and it's time to barbecue, and it's time to have, Sunday lunch or whatever. How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's difficult because you do carry the pains and the stresses of Monday to Friday to Saturday, Sunday. And it's like, well, I don't really want to go for Thanksgiving dinner with mom and dad because there was this issue that happened, right?
Yep.
And so it's really important, even more important as families, to create intentional spaces to bond outside of the business. And I'm from an enterprising family. The business is our hobby. I get it.
Right.
I get it. But also, the business can be a source of stresses and strains that are not expressed.
So let's talk about that. How do I create that intentional space? Tell me about that.
So, quite simply, family vacations is the best way. Because on vacation, what happens is you're not limited by time, you have presence of mind, you've got space in your head to think, and you genuinely, typically, enjoy each other's company.
Okay.
And you get to know each other, not just from we're talking about the business and the decisions we need to make, but we go personal, right? We talk more about the grandkids. We talk more about family events that are coming up. We talk about family issues and we bond. And we can also, on a vacation, use the opportunity to have a family meeting.
Right.
So for half a morning or half a day rather, after we've de-stressed from the stresses of our entrepreneurial lifestyles and general 21st century living, and start to co-create together. What do we want for this business? Where's it heading? How do we each fit into it? What is the future looking like? What are the issues? Because these are not conversations we have on the fly. We have to be intentional about them.
Right.
We have to plan the time, the headspace, and the heart space to have these conversations as a family.
So what led you from so you went London, Lagos, and now you're in Austin, Texas. What led you to Austin, Texas?
So my husband, his life is Lagos, North Carolina, Lagos. So similar to me. And we always knew that we'd move to the States. And last year during the pandemic, we were like kind of frustrated with the way things were in Lagos. And decided it was time for us to move. And Austin seemed like this up and coming city.
Right.
And so we came out on Easter and fell in love with it and decided to move. And we moved in July.
So are you still involved in your family business?
Not as an operational leader, but I'm on the board.
Uh-huh.
And I also chair the family council.
How did your father handle that when tell me about that, because
denial first. We went through the 4 stages of grief.
Yeah, right.
Literally. There was a lot of denial and a lot of like bargaining and negotiating. And I was like, well, I'm not running a construction company remotely.
Right.
It's not possible. And I feel like my time as an operational executive leader of a family office is done. And the non-family staff have the capacity to lead executive function wise, and I will be a board member. And it was not on my part, there was no budging. I knew what I wanted, and it was for him to kind of coming to terms with the decision. And right now, I think he sees the value. I mean, in the work that I do consulting families, but I also, my antennas always open towards opportunities for our investments back home. So
Right.
how can I use my social capital out here to enhance what we have back home through strategic partners, through potential investors, through just general learnings and things like that. And so he's accepted it now. He just actually left Austin a week ago. He came out to visit us for a couple of weeks, and he's very supportive.
So this leads to an interesting question. I think we can wrap up with this question, because was your move precipitated as a result of your marriage, or was that something?
This is a good question. I've never thought of that. If I wasn't married, I probably would not be in the US. Well, definitely wouldn't be, because I'm not an American citizen. My husband is.
Right.
See what I mean? Like, and if I was going to move as a single lady, I probably would have moved back to the UK.
Right.
And the UK is the same time zone as Nigeria, and it's just a 5-hour flight. And
Yeah.
so I probably would still be involved in the business. So yeah, that's an added dynamic that happens to dad boss, who he had expressed a couple of times, like, he's no longer the main man in my life.
Right.
See what I mean? I never
Yeah.
thought about it.
No, but because it's, I think that's such a tremendous challenge for some companies who, you have your kids and perhaps you're on the same page with your kids, and then a spouse comes in and that affects the family dynamic, either if the spouse is, whether or not the spouse is involved in the business itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they have a very good relationship, but notwithstanding, this is the first time I'm actually thinking about it. Like, I am sure there's been on his part, like, a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how many different aspects of relational life you have to negotiate when you're involved in a family business.
For sure. For sure.
Interesting. So as we're wrapping up then here, what can you give us 3 specific things that a first generation family business owner should be doing to prepare the next generation?
Start early. So expose them to the business from an early age.
Right.
They won't fall in love with what they don't know.
Okay.
So they may be legal owners of a business, but you want them to be emotional owners, where they really take ownership, quite frankly, and want the best for the business and seek to add value to the business. Start having these conversations as a family as to where is all of this heading?
Yep.
Where are we going? What is this for? And be very intentional about it, carving the space and the time in the diary, in the head and the heart,
Yep.
To bond as a family. And understand, lastly, that the way things have been is not the way things will be. If we want the family business to succeed over time, it has to change by its very nature. It will change. The family's relationship to it will change, and change is necessary. And just the sooner you embrace that and prepare for that, the better.
Okay. And then let's flip it the other way, because you personally have experience here. What are 3 pieces of advice you would give to a child who is observing their family, considering whether or not to either get into the business or to stay in the business or grow into the business?
Be patient. Rome is not built in a day. Quite often, as the next generation, we can be quite flighty, impatient. We want instant results, but when you're working in a family enterprise, there are many moving parts, many different players, and influencing does take time. I would say, like we spoke about, get external experiences.
Yes.
Whether that's career experiences or whether that's in community. So joining associations, of other next geners like yourself that have navigated going through family business dynamics and come out the other side. It's really important. Thirdly, embrace and understand that the founder of the business has a different perspective, priority, and preference to you. And so in trying to affect change and influence, you have to speak in a language that resonates with their preference, their priorities, and their perspective. And that may take you reflecting and listening and observing for a while to get to understand the way they see things and their psyche, so that you can communicate in a language that they will understand.
That was pretty golden right there. That's good stuff. Good stuff. I really appreciate your time. How can people get in touch with you?
Yes, you may check out my website, www.nikeanani.com, NIKEANANI.com. On there, you'll see the links to my social media. So I'm most active on LinkedIn and also super active on Instagram. And my email address is there if you want to just reach out and have a chat. Happy to.
And tell our audience specifically, what is the one thing that you do to most benefit the family businesses you work with?
Get them to understand one another, that empathy. Get them to understand the preferences, perspectives, and priorities with one another so they can communicate better.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think the experience that you have both entering and then exiting the business, as far as the operational aspect is concerned, I think that would be tremendously useful for people in terms of being able to get some outside help as far as just the general dynamic of a family business is concerned. Yeah,
for sure.
That's great. Nika, I really, really appreciate your time. I've very much enjoyed this conversation. I think we'll have to do it again sometime and get you back on the show at some point.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it myself.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Make sure you check out the show notes for how you can get in touch with Nike. And this show episode was brought to you by the free report, 7 Qualities of Highly Successful Emerging Leaders. Go to my website, constructiongenius.com/emerging leaders. There's a link in the show notes. Many construction company owners struggle to attract, develop, and retain young leaders. If that is a struggle you're having, read the short report, 7 Qualities of Highly Successful Emerging Leaders, and discover the qualities that successful emerging construction leaders have in common. This will help you to identify those qualities and develop those qualities in others and ensure that the next generation in your construction company is able to perform at the highest possible level. So again, go to the link in the show notes. Feel free to download that report. Let me know if you have any questions about it. And thanks again for listening to Construction Genius today.